always told, forgive and forget. And I think that's a misnomer. I don't think we should do that. Today I entitled this, Forgive and Not Forget. And forgiveness and remembrance, maybe that's a good one. I don't have a great memory. I never had. Some things I'm very good memory. You want to ask me about Tolkien lore? I probably won't way too much. Things like people's names, not as great. I can tell you that, like, the third elf in the Second Age that was helping make the rings, I can tell you that name. But Jim used to make fun of me when I first came on staff, that there'd be people and I'd be like, now what's their name? And he's like, you've known them for 3 years. And hey, so if I ever called you buddy, I apologize. Hey, Scout. The worst example of this was we were at my sister's graduation from college. And we're sitting there and a gal walked across and they announced it. And my other sister and my wife, and they just went nuts cheering. And I'm like, now who's that? And they're like, this is the girl who's babysat your kids twice a week for the last 3 years. I was like, oh, that's her. Oh, yeah, I never knew her name. I was not very involved at that part. I'm now to the age where I walk into a room and forget why I got up and went into that room. Do any of you have that problem? And then I walk back down, I'm like, well, I guess it wasn't important to sit down. And I'm like, oh, that's what it was, and get up and put on repeat. That's why I have such extensive notes up here, because I will forget what I'm talking about and tend to ramble. Which reminds me, just kidding, I was going to do that. I have great memories, meeting Deborah for the first time, the birth of our kids, weddings. I have kids that have varying degrees of good memories, of not good memories about them, but their level of memory. Calvin, those of you who know Calvin, he has the best memory of all of them. He was the kid that if I said, hey, next Friday we're thinking about going to the park. Friday morning at 4:15, he's right by the bed. Are we going to the park yet? He would never forget. And of course it has to be a dog story, but he was the one who wanted to get a dog. And we were living at camp at the time, and I said, we can't get a dog. So when we moved off camp, we told him, hey, we're going to go somewhere where we can have a dog. But the several places after that we moved, we couldn't have a dog. And that was 4 years past, maybe 4 or 7, something like that. We finally got a house that had a backyard that was fenced. He comes upstairs with the dog dish that we had given him that Christmas. And he's like, so when are we getting the dog? I'm like, you're a senior in high school. You're going off to college. So you're really asking, when am I getting a dog? And then he pursued it doggedly, pun intended. And, thanks. The groan was hurtful. And they got Ginny. Now, Ginny has the best memory. We go on a walk. One time, this has literally been probably 6 years ago. Has it been 6 years? Yeah. We're going for a walk. She found half an old rotted hot dog in a bush. Ew. Every time we walk past that bush, she has to stop and see if the magic hot dog bush has replenished. Every single time. There's different things that spark memory. They say that scent is the biggest spark of memory. Sometimes I think crisis, when we're in a crisis, our memory becomes crystal clear. Have you ever had that happen? I remember I hurt myself. I was at the emergency room. My brother had taken me to the emergency room when we were in college. And they were asking me questions, and he was like, how did you know, what's your dad's birth date? What is the last 4 of your mom's social? What is your great aunt? And I was just popping answers like this, and he's like, something happened. There was some adrenaline going through your body that made you remember things. He was like, I couldn't remember forever. We have embarrassing, y'all have those things that you're laying there at night and you remember something embarrassing from your teen years and you wake up and can't get back to sleep. I have none of those. I just heard that happens to people. But we have memory for a reason. We have memory for a reason to help form us and help us make different decisions in the future. To guide us as we live now. And especially with forgiveness. We don't want to forget. We want to remember why we were forgiven and how we can forgive others. Experiencing and offering forgiveness requires acknowledging and facing and understanding our past. You guys know this, I'm a big fan of therapy. I think that having someone guide you through that, help you through remembering your past and unpacking it and understanding how it's affected you, and especially in ways that maybe we don't acknowledge, is powerful. I remember when I kind of realized this, that I had recommended therapy for somebody because they had this glaring issue that they just could not acknowledge. And we're like, everyone in your life is telling you this is a problem. Maybe you should go and help unpack that. And as I was like, man, I'm so glad they did that, I had this thought, like, I wonder if I have any glaring issues that I'm not aware of that somebody could help me with. And I said, no, that's probably not true. And no, I went to therapy, and it was, well, like session 1/2, like 3 minutes in, I pointed out some things. I went, oh my word, I use humor as a deflection? And it's a joke, obviously, because I clearly do. But the point of remembering is not to wallow in it, and it's not just catharsis that we remember something and feel better. It's not to beat ourselves up. It's a valuable touchstone that leads us to a better life and a better future when we remember. So I just want to briefly talk about this today. It's not going to be a huge, long treatise, but just some thoughts. Being forgiven, first of all, being forgiven requires facing our past. Being forgiven obviously requires facing our past. We have to acknowledge and go, what have I done that I need to be forgiven for? If we never look at our past, if we never acknowledge it, then we'll never admit that we need help. And we need grace, and we need forgiveness, and we need mercy. I love the story of the prodigal son, the parable of the prodigal son that Jesus tells you, right? There's a rich guy, he has rich kids, and one of the kids decides, I want to get my money now, and I'm going to go spend it on riotous living. So he does this, he runs out of money, and it ends up as the assistant to the manager of a pig farm. And as he's working there, and he's hungry, and there's a famine, and he's thinking about eating the pig food, he realizes that, hey, even the slaves, even the workers in my dad's home have a better life. So in the story, he runs home, and he's like, I'm going to beg my dad to take me back and let me be a servant. Meanwhile, the other brother has been home working hard, taking care of the farm. He realizes in this story, he realizes his failure, and he goes home contrite. Luke 15, 21 through 24 is where Jesus is telling this part of the story. The son comes home and he says, the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf that we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and now has returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And so the party began. Love this story. The prodigal son realizes he needs forgiveness. He's been selfish. He's been sinful. He has violated his dad, and he acknowledged fully the failure of his past. He looked around him and he said, oh my word, what have I done? I have sinned against my father. His father knew full well what his son had done. He knew that he was lost, but what he knew more than that is that now he was found. Without knowing something is lost, how can it be found? Without realizing that we're missing something, how can we look for it? The prodigal recognized his need. In order for us to really understand forgiveness, to really experience the joy and the relief and the comfort and the love of being forgiven, we need to acknowledge that we needed to be forgiven, that we've done something wrong. Psalm 51 in your readings this week, there in the back, next to the giving box and all that. The readings, one of them is Psalm 51. This is the poem that David wrote after he was caught not only in having an affair with Bathsheba, but he admitted that he had her husband killed. Horrible murder. Arranging the murder and having an affair. He's begging forgiveness. Verses 1 through 4 says this, have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love. Because of your great compassion, blot out the stain of my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin, for I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. Against you and you alone have I sinned. I have done what is evil in your sight, You will be proved right in what you say, and your judgment against me is just. David recognized his failing. He remembered it. He constantly was nagging at him. He had to acknowledge it. It was a stain on him. He realized his rebellion, recognizing that he had begun to think that his way of living life was going to be better than God's way. And David was able to look back at his behavior and his heart of rebellion, not just his actions, but his spirit. And if he had not been able to look back, then he's not able to experience the repentance, the compassion, the love, and the ability of God and the mercy of God to blot out his sins. Repentance, if he didn't really look back, repentance would just be saying, I just want to get out of the consequences, instead of real repentance. Confession requires that we remember something. In order to confess, we have to be specific. One of the things that's hard to do, one of the things we do in recovery, is we are specific about where we failed and who we have violated. We can't really ask forgiveness. We can't really understand forgiveness. We can't really experience forgiveness unless we say, this is what I have done. And again, it's not wallowing. It's not catharsis. It's acknowledging what we need forgiveness for. We can't get well if we don't know we're sick. One of the first things to do is convince somebody. I got to admit, I'm not great at that. Deb will say, are you feeling okay? I'm like, no, I'm fine. I had someone random this week. This shows you how well I live when Deb's gone. Because I end up doing the main thing is trying to feed myself. Which actually, frankly, I do most of the cooking. But when Deb's gone, there's no point in cooking. You know, it's just me. And I had someone randomly go, are you okay? You look really tired. It was probably the best day I had of the week. I was working hard and I was like, wow. Apparently I need to either iron my clothes or open my eyes more or something. We can't get well if we don't know we're sick. I have been guilty of this. I have been guilty of saying I don't want to go to the doctor because I don't want to know I'm sick. You know that? Like I don't feel good, but I don't want somebody to tell me I'm sick. We need to admit that we need forgiveness. Specify, be specific. When we're praying, when you're talking to God, when you're asking forgiveness, let me challenge you this week. This is the application. This is what I want you to do. I want us to be able to specifically go to God and know all of that mercy, all of that grace, all of that compassion, all of that care can cover even your thing that you're most ashamed of. Even the thing that you said you were going to do and you didn't do. Even the thing that you're embarrassed of. Thing that you could never really admit, even to yourself. Be specific. Actually face the real stuff. It takes bravery. Be brave. Admit you were really mean to somebody. Admit you said something that it wasn't just an accident. You kind of hoped it would hurt. Admit those things that we don't want to admit to anyone else. And you know what will happen in the middle of that? The lightning bolt from heaven will not come down and strike you. God is going to say, yeah, I know. And I love you. And I care for you. And I forgive you. Accept that forgiveness. That's a hard one. We want to kind of earn it. At least I do. I kind of want to earn it. I want to either feel bad, feel like I need to feel bad enough about it, grovel a little bit before God will forgive me, or maybe do enough good, or maybe try and fix it. No. Accepting forgiveness is hard because it's giving up control. We can't force it. We have to just acknowledge that God forgives us. We cannot accept true forgiveness without the realization that we can't accept true forgiveness on our own. We cannot realize without memory. There's all sorts of times I've needed to ask forgiveness. Obviously, I have huge things. All my years in addiction, that was part of my process, was making amends. I had to go through and acknowledge and write down, do an inventory, and then I had to go to people and make amends and tell them I was sorry. And then let them forgive me. Accept forgiveness. I had to remember all the stuff. And then it's out of my control. And you know what? Most people did. Most people were forgiving. But you know who forgave me every single time was Jesus. Accepting forgiveness requires we face our past. Offering forgiveness requires that we face our past. We know the story of Joseph. Genesis, he was another rich kid. This is not a parable. This is a real story. He's a rich kid. He had 12 brothers. And Dad loved Joseph most. second to the youngest. And we know the story. If you've seen the musical, he got a coat of many colors. I don't know if you're aware of that. Very attractive. Dad lavished gifts and praise upon Joseph. And even so much, he was so unaware. I love this part, like, just not a clue of how to get along socially. He would have these grandiose dreams where he was the king and his brothers were bowing down for him, and, they're like sheaves of wheat bowing down to his. And he runs out and tells his brothers, oh my goodness, you won't believe this, who already is wearing his coat from his dad and getting all the love. And he's like, I've had dreams from God that I'm going to be so much better than you. You think I'm better than you now? It's going to even be better than that. And so they fake kill him. They decide, we are sick and tired of this punk. And instead of killing at the last second, they're going to kill him at the last second, the thing where they throw him in the pit, and they take the coat of many colors and they put sheep's blood on it. And then they sell him to slavers going to Egypt. And they go back to dad and say, you're going to be so sad. Our Joseph, who we really, really loved, we're heartbroken, has died. And his father, Abram, was brokenhearted. But Joseph, we know the story, right? Gets sold into slavery in Potiphar's house, has some problems there, gets thrown in jail, has some meets up with the butler and the chef, and he has dreams and he interprets their dreams, and finally gets out. Pharaoh has some dreams that I like this part of the story where he's like, I want to make sure that my magicians are real magicians, that they're really telling me the truth. So I had this dream, I want you to interpret it. I'm not going to tell you the dream, and you need to tell me the dream and the interpretation. And most of them couldn't do it. And so most of them were offed. And then one time they're like, oh, hey, wait, we were in jail with that guy, remember? And so they bring Joseph up. He prays and asks God, hey, I need your help. And he remembers the dream for Pharaoh, and then he interprets it right. He says there's going to be 7 years of famine, 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. We need to store up food so that you can get through the famine. And the Pharaoh is like, you are an idea man. You're going to be my second in charge, and you're going to be in charge of that process. So he makes him second in command. Then there is the years of plenty. Then there is famine. Apparently nobody else thought of saving food, which is odd. But only those in Egypt thought of saving some up. And his 12 brothers show up, begging for food, looking to buy grain. And he kind of toys with them for a while, but he does give them the food. And eventually in Genesis 45, verses 4 and 5, he calls them. Please come closer, he said to them. So they came closer. And he said again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. And you can imagine just them, what now, right? He says, but don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. Joseph had to look back over his life story and see the selfishness and fear and sin and failure of his brothers against him as it really was. Not denying the pain, not pretending like it was fine. And this idea of, we say, God, you meant it for evil, God meant it for good. We kind of use that sometimes to gloss over stuff. No, that's not the point. This was a deep dive into how bad they had been to him. And he says, anyway, in spite of that, don't be angry with yourselves. I forgive you. And now we're going to take care of it. I'm going to tangibly show that how you are forgiven by giving you grain, by caring for your needs. It was not a denial of the pain, not denial of what happened, but it was accepting it and forgiving. Also, Joseph also saw clearly how God had used that, not to cheapen it, but to follow God's example of finding good even in bad situations. Joseph used that reflection to forgive. He could have used that whole time to unleash his bitterness. He could have used his newfound power and his newfound authority to crush them. That is hard for a little brother to not do to his big brother. If any of you have brothers, man, what a chance, right? But instead, he uses that reflection, he uses that memory to embolden and make his forgiveness all the more sweet. He acknowledged, he refused to deny that both the wrong done to him and the grace of God shows in this story. It's not denial. It's not saying, hey, it's all okay. He said, no, this was bad. And I forgive you. And you are forgiven by God because look how he used this. Sometimes we have a limit. Sometimes we need to remember when we forgive. Sometimes we're like, I have forgiven that person too many times. Like, and I don't think it's wrong to have a boundary and say, I forgive you, but that means our relationship may change. But I do love this. It's important for us to remember Luke 17:4. Even if that person wrongs you 7 times a day, and each time turns again and asks for forgiveness, you must forgive. I like the wording here, just the English wording. The English translation right here is not should, or consider, or if they, no, the answer is you must forgive. If someone comes to you, someone keeps doing the same thing, but they are repentant, they ask forgiveness, we must forgive. Now again, does that mean, it doesn't always mean the actions are the same. It doesn't mean that we give them money or that we let them back into the same kind of relationship we had before, but it does mean that we must forgive and leave the door open. It's not that we don't hold up extra barriers to forgiveness. We don't put new conditions on it. We forgive. So how do we live this out? How do we do this practically? What does this mean? Ignoring something rather than forgiving leaves the seeds of bitterness and rage. I found this true myself. When I pretend like it's fine. Have you ever had that happen? Someone hurts your feelings, and maybe they don't seem like they're sorry enough. Or maybe sometimes I've done this where I think, that's not really worthy of getting upset about. But the reality is I am upset. I am hurt. And rather than saying, I'm hurt, but I'm going to choose to forgive them, we hold on to the bitterness. If we refuse to even acknowledge that there needs to be forgiveness, that something has happened, it leaves seeds of bitterness and rage. Forgiveness sees it as it is and still offers grace. Forgiveness sees the pain, sees the damage, sees the hurt, acknowledges it as it truly is, and still offers grace. It does not mean there's no consequence. It doesn't mean they're back in your life as if it never happened. In fact, that's kind of the point of this, that it is something happened. Life changes. We can adjust our relationship. We can be more helpful. We can be more involved. We can be more loving when we acknowledge that there's been pain and we come back together. It doesn't even mean that we need to have a relationship necessarily, but it does mean that we need to give up our anger and give up our hurt. We need to forgive. It doesn't mean that it's not held. It does mean that it's not held against them. We need to give up resentment. We need to pardon them. I think of it like a broken bone. I don't know if this is true. I've heard this my whole life. There may be some medical people who told me that when your broken bone heals, that it's stronger at the point where it was broken. That may be just completely apocryphal. But I like this way it sounds. The idea that sometimes when we've had a conflict, we can grow back together stronger. But if we don't remember what it was about, then we can genuinely and realistically and specifically forgive, then that never heals. It festers if we never acknowledge that forgiveness is needed. Refusing to acknowledge it causes poison in my soul. And this is not, and I'm not talking about being unforgiving. I'm talking about not even acknowledging that we needed forgiveness, that we need to forgive somebody. We have to realize the effect to diagnose it. In recovery, doing an inventory is usually brought up as the idea of all my bad stuff. And we've talked about it. We make an inventory. We sit down and we physically write down all the things we did that we are ashamed of, all the things that are the bad, and we make a list and we repent of that. But also alongside that, and I think much deeper, one of the things we do, one of the sections we do is we acknowledge our resentments. We acknowledge the people that we've resented, rightfully or not. Sometimes there are people who have hurt us. Sometimes there are people who we perceived as hurt us. They didn't even know. They didn't know they were doing it, and we have to acknowledge that. If we cannot forgive unless we admit that we've been hurt. I'm going to leave us with this. Those are important concepts to understand, that we need to remember our past, we need to face our past to be able to ask for forgiveness, and we need to face our past in order to forgive others. But we need to live in that pattern. That needs to be the way we live. I don't know if you know the story of Zacchaeus. I don't know if you're aware, but he was a wee little man. Thank you. Jim, let's sing that. Come on, let's do it. He was a tax collector, and he was a crooked tax collector. He was skimming money off people, and he was hated, right? Tax collectors were collaborators with the Romans, with the occupying force. And the way he made his money was charging extra tax with the people that were his friends, that lived around him. But he was interested in this Jesus guy. And when he hears Jesus is coming to town, what does he do? He can't see, right? Because he is what? He's a short. He is a wee little man. And so Jesus is coming through town. He can't see, he can't hear. So he climbs up in a sycamore tree. Very specific, interesting point. Climbs up in a tree so that he can see, and probably kind of hidden. And Jesus there, and Jesus stops and is like, "Hey, Zacchaeus, what are you doing up in the tree?" And Zacchaeus says, "I am a wee little man." No, he says, Jesus says, "Yeah, you need to get down there because I'm going to go to your house today. I'm going to have lunch with you." And I love in the story that it makes special point that the good religious people were mad. I'm like, Jesus, what are you doing having lunch with a collaborator and a thief? And he hangs out with other collaborators and other people of ill repute. But Jesus says, hey, he's forgiven. He's forgiven. So when Jesus comes by, he looks up at Zacchaeus, is in Luke 19, and called him, "Zacchaeus," he said, "quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today." And Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. First of all, that's what forgiveness feels like. He knows everyone hates him. He's known he's done all this bad stuff. And there's this moment now where Jesus, by acknowledging him and saying, "I'm going to come be with you," he realizes he is forgiven. It brings him great excitement and joy. But the other people were displeased. Have you ever been mad when someone gets forgiven? Right? Wait, they should be punished a little bit more, especially if you have siblings. There's a little bit in there. Right? The people were displeased. He's gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner. Not just a sinner, a sinner of note. They grumbled. And I love the grumbling. I can't believe this guy going over there. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and he said, "I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I had cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much." And Jesus responded, "Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost." I love this way. This is living in forgiveness. Zacchaeus is going to do something about it. He's making amends. He's going to he's remembering who he sinned against. He's going to specifically make them whole. He's also going to say, there's a lot of just general, I need to live a better life. And I'm going to start that by giving away half what I've got to the poor. Our response to forgiveness is to live again. Our response to forgiveness is to be able to start to live, to go back and try and make some amends, first of all. Forgiveness actually changed how he lived. I love that he was living in forgiveness now. We have no reason to believe that he went back on it. That he was now it's a Scrooge type of story, right? He's now living a different way. He made it right. He didn't keep cheating. But I don't think the other people really bought it. And that's why I think Jesus had to say, hey, no. This is real. Salvation came. He is truly forgiven. And he's really how it should be done. He's a true son of Abraham. This is how it should be lived. Not by following all the rules and looking down and making sure everybody else is following the rules and pointing out when they don't. I keep pointing at Ben, sorry. That's purely accidental. Right? And he says, hey, by the way, and I forget where I got this quote about this story. And you kind of have to think about it for a minute. No one is so found that they are not lost. And no one is so lost that they cannot be found. And I stole that from somebody. But I love that concept. He's looking at the religious people who think they are so great. They are the most found people. And he says, no, I didn't come for you guys. Those who think they're found. I came to find the lost. But at the same time, who are really lost? Jesus really did come for the religious. They just needed to acknowledge they were found. They needed to be found. They needed to actually remember where they came from. They needed to remember why they worshiped God in the first place. They needed to remember why, for us, we need to remember why we're Christians. Not to point out how other churches do it wrong, or how other people are not right, or how people out there in the world are sinners. Yes, it's fine, but we need to remember, oh wait, that was me. That was us. We're not so found that we can't get lost. When we live in forgiveness as a fundamental characteristic of our life, we have a chance to live a real life of joy and excitement. We should be characterized by people who are asking for forgiveness and offering forgiveness unfettered as a fundamental characteristic of who we are. Unreasonably forgiving. Again, that doesn't mean unhealthy, like don't have boundaries, but it does mean we just need to be people who are forgiving and people who understand and remember why we're forgiven. I think that's characterized by kindness, tenderheartedness. Being unforgiving leads to a hard heart. We need to be people who see people as worthy of forgiving, people who are worthy of protecting, people who are worthy of love. And just some real quick practical things to do. Number one is make amends. As we go back and forgive and not forget, remember what we've done and try and make amends. Sometimes that's just saying something to somebody. I am so sorry. Here's what I did. Here's what I've been worried about. Here's what I said. And then leave it up to them. Don't manipulate. Don't demand. Just offer. Sometimes the best amend in recovery, we talk about this all the time, the best amend in recovery is to stop using. That makes everybody's life better. So maybe there's a habit that you have. The best amend is to stop. Get some help. One of the things we can do is to make it right. Maybe there's something physical or financial or emotional or relational or spiritual that we have done. And in making amends, we don't just say, I'm sorry. We find ways to make it right. So we're looking back with a purpose. We are remembering with a purpose, seeing the grace and forgiveness of God as motivation to live that way, to acknowledge that of ourselves, and offer that to others. Living like we've been forgiven means I have to acknowledge specific things about me, and I can live in the joy that those things no longer rule me. I don't let shame and regret motivate me. I don't hide my failure. And not to everybody. I don't flaunt my failure to everyone, but that I acknowledge it to God and at least to some. And I certainly don't hide the grace that empowers us to live in Christ. I love Romans 5:8. Right? While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. At our worst moment, he was his most loving. He was his most sacrificing. I've told you guys this story before, but when this really hit me when I was in early recovery, I was doing my inventory. And at one point, I had sold my wedding ring to buy drugs. Probably the most shameful thing. And this verse hit me at that moment, when I was making this horrible choice, that Christ looked at me and said, I'm willing to die for you. That's forgiveness. I would not be able to understand forgiveness if I wasn't willing to look back at that moment, if I pretended it didn't happen. But I can experience forgiveness from God, and thank goodness from my wife and from my family and from you guys. I can now bask in forgiveness. And you know what? One of the sidelines of that is when I understand that, I have no problem forgiving others. I mean, I'm still human. I fail sometimes. But you know what I want to do? I want you to experience that forgiveness of Christ, from Christ. Whatever you've done, whatever you've said, and maybe it's tangibly not as bad as that, but maybe you said something that you've regretted for years, or you've thought ill of something, or maybe whatever it is, I long to have you experience the forgiveness of God for specifically remembering, specifically pouring out your heart and asking God to forgive you, and so that you can experience that too. Make a memorial of our mistakes. Make an altar to the hurts that we have endured because God has forgiven us and died for us and loves us. I'll leave us with this. We need to remember. I'll leave us on a little higher note. I have 2 animals. I want you to be like my dog, not like my cats. We need to remember and forgive and be forgiving. I gave my cat, we have to give him medicine. And I had to wrap her in a towel and hold it, and she's hissing and biting and scratching. And I had to take that pill and shove it all the way down her throat and hold her mouth shut for about an hour and a half. And then when I opened it, it came flying out, like completely dry. I don't know how they do that. Finally got it. That cat never liked me again for the rest of its life. My dog sleeps at the foot of the floor by her bed. I just stepped on her head the other day. And she looked up at me and said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "I'm so sorry." And she turned and comes up right next to me and puts her head on me and cuddles me and loves me. That's what forgiveness is like. We need to remember Ashley the cat never forgave. And I think she forgot why she hated me. But I experienced forgiveness from my dog that gave me joy and happiness. Forgiveness is not God saying, "Okay, let's try this again, only this time try not to mess up so much." No, forgiveness is God saying, "You are forgiven and loved, and let's keep on trying, only this time remember how much I love you. And let's go for a walk." We'll leave with this, Ephesians 4:32. So instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. May we be people who remember our need for forgiveness and the need to forgive others so we can experience the fullness of God's forgiveness. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week. And go hug your dog.